And I'm going to go ahead and get things started with our guest today, Mpp Todd Smith. Welcome.
Good morning.
Good morning. Thank you so much for taking the time out of your busy schedule. I know along with being the MPP, you're also a minister, and so I know that your schedule is extremely busy. And I know that you're hearing from many of the local businesses in your riding. So I'm sure you've got all kinds of comments and expressing your concern over some of their challenges that they're having. And I know from the Chamber's perspective, we've been sending out updates pretty well every other day, emails to our members with details on the changes that keep coming from the federal government and the provincial government, and understanding that none of us have really been through a pandemic before. So it certainly does make it a challenge for people to follow these programs, because they keep evolving, they keep changing. And one thing we know going through this pandemic is you have to stay tuned and you have to follow what's going on. And I know when I'm on a phone call every day with the Chief of Staff for Minister Ng, he keeps saying, go back to the websites. Like those websites keep getting updated as well. And so people need to keep going back to those links and following along, because it really is an ever-changing landscape. And of course, this makes it frustrating for businesses. And I just keep telling them to, keep sending us the feedback, keep putting the pressure on, because governments are listening and they are making changes. So with that introduction, I'm going to throw the floor over to you. And then I do have some questions that have been pre-submitted. And we also do have some people on the line that are going to ask some questions live. So we'll let you go ahead. And I wanted to let everybody know that this webinar is being recorded, and we will be sharing it afterwards. And there is a Q&A button along the bottom of your screen. So please go ahead, and if you have any questions, or if something comes up while Mpp Smith is talking, and you want to follow up, or you want to ask another question, please use that Q&A. Or you can also use the raise hand feature, and if we have time at the end, we'll certainly open it up to some live questions. Okay, there we go. Welcome.
Thanks, Suzanne. It's hard to believe, isn't it, that it was just over 2 months ago that you were at Queen's Park in the legislative dining room, and I think it was the same week that this all kind of started to implode, and the state of emergency was declared the next week in the province. And who really would have seen what has taken place over the next 2 months taking place. So it has been an unusual time, and thanks to everybody who's doing the best they can to keep their businesses going. I do have some written remarks that I wanted to bring to you this morning, and then I'm happy to take any questions that you have. Yesterday, as many of you probably know, we were back at Queen's Park, and for the first question period that we've had in 2 months. And it was very, very strange to be back at Queen's Park with social distancing and just a handful of members in the legislature taking questions from the opposition parties. So we are going to be in this sort of new state of temporary normal for a little while, I think. And the House is going to be back every Tuesday and Wednesday, is my understanding, for most of the next couple of months. So anyway, it is great to be able to connect with so many familiar friends in Quinte West this morning. And as we all know, as the mayor likes to say, Quinte West is the best, and they've got a great Chamber of Commerce there. So thanks to Suzanne and Jennifer and Morgan, who do such a great job in the office every day and making sure that they're representing the voice of business in Quinte West and lobbying on your behalf to the federal and provincial governments for new programs. It's also nice to be able to be here this morning with the sun shining after a bit of a lengthy hiatus with public safety in mind. And we're starting to see the economy reopening with some of the household safety shops, Canadian Tire and hardware stores like Home Hardware opening up last weekend, and then curbside pickup for all retailers, and opening dates for several outdoor activities on the horizon. The Premier hinted yesterday that he's going to be out tomorrow and talk about the next phase of reopening businesses and what that's going to look like during his daily press conference at 1 o'clock tomorrow. So as Suzanne says, stay tuned and make sure you're watching at 1 o'clock tomorrow, because there is going to be more detail unveiled at that time. We certainly are in strange times, as Suzanne mentioned, and I've been fortunate to spend more time in the Bay of Quinte as a result of that. Normally, as a cabinet minister, I'm stuck in Queen's Park most of the time, or elsewhere in the province traveling around. But even though I've been home, I feel almost more distant than I ever have from you, because I haven't been able to walk through the doors of your businesses and see your smiling faces and see you at chamber events and other community events over the last couple of months. We've been working hard on our response to COVID-19 at Queen's Park, and we are in uncharted territory. It's been very, very bizarre. It's almost like being in an alternate universe, because my whole career in government, approaching 9 years now, has been dedicated to helping reduce red tape and making sure that we're eliminating barriers to business across the province. And in less than 2 years, as the government of Ontario, we helped create 300,000 jobs before this pandemic struck. And then in the blink of an eye, we saw the doors close on a lot of those businesses. So it does seem like a bit of a bizarro world. My office used to help all those businesses with opportunities and grants, and now we're dealing with your businesses answering questions like, when can I open my doors and when can I roll out the red carpet to my customers again? So it's been very, very difficult for me as the member of parliament as well, and my staff, and difficult on you, I know. We've been taking our advice from the Chief Medical Officer of Health. This has been difficult, but it's been necessary to protect our people. And I think we've seen the results of these kinds of measures really paying off in Ontario. You don't have to look too far, just to our south in New York State, our west in the state of Michigan, and even to our east in Quebec, to see how much worse this could have been. So the measures that we have taken here in Ontario, although they're very, very frustrating for businesses, they've been working, and health and safety of Ontario residents has been the #1 priority for our government, for our premier, for our team. Christine Elliott has been doing an outstanding job trying to put the right measures in place along with the Chief Medical Officer of Health. So we ask you for your patience as we continue to move through these very, very trying times. I know some businesses have done a great job at adjusting. I was over at Wanamaker's Bakery a couple of weeks ago when they had the bakery up and running on a Saturday, and people were waiting in the yard. And I will tell you that I did enjoy my eclairs and my cinnamon buns that day, and they were overrun with people who were just begging to help their local businesses out. And we've seen that kind of Ontario spirit and that Quinte West spirit supporting the businesses there, and we want to do as much as we can to help our local businesses. We've been getting some strange calls here at the office as well from people and businesses. We had a lady who just wanted to go out and buy a bra. That's all she wanted to do, was go buy a bra. And of course, you can't go out and try on a bra these days. So I was a bit surprised to hear that people were wearing bras these days because they don't have to go anywhere. But that was one of the funny stories we had. We had a weird one yesterday as well, where a lady called. She wondered if her neighbor could come over and braid her daughter's hair, which of course wouldn't be meeting the guidelines set out by the Chief Medical Officer of Health. But we've been getting all kinds of strange calls like that we've been answering for constituents in the Bay of Quinte and for business owners. We've had very, very tough questions as well about rents coming due without any profits, businesses operating without social distancing, possible price gouging very, very early on in the pandemic. The Premier made a point of making sure that that type of gouging wasn't occurring. There's been a scarcity of a whole range of items, from hair dyes to toilet paper and hand sanitizers and those types of things. And certainly we've heard a lot about personal protective equipment, and there still are challenges when it comes to PPE. And the Premier has made a note of making sure that this will never happen again. God forbid something like this does happen again, but we will have our own domestic supply of PPE that's available to us. We won't have to depend on neighboring countries or countries on the other side of the world for this type of PPE. And that's the one thing about this. You know, they say that difficulty breeds opportunity, and that you can learn a lot from a crisis like this. And I think this has certainly opened the eyes when it comes to procurement at the provincial government, which is one of the areas that the Premier has great experience in, given the fact that he does operate a manufacturing facility in Etobicoke. You know, that type of expertise, his black belt that he has in the Lean Six Sigma has really come to the forefront when it comes to the procurement in Ontario, and making sure that the many black belts that we have in the public service that have never really been asked to use their skills are using their skills to ensure that we're changing the way that the government is doing business. So it's been a real opportunity as well for us to seize the opportunity when it comes to technology. And I know many of the businesses out there in Quinte West have seized that opportunity to bring technology into their businesses. And you can really see that spirit on display. And it is heartening. I was reading this morning actually about the Fashion Coalition of Trenton with Off the Hook and Vivacious and Studio B. They're using their retail expertise to sell masks, the barrier masks, to the public online. And then they're donating the proceeds to our friends at the Trenton Memorial Hospital Foundation. So it's that kind of spirit that's alive and well across Ontario, but certainly here in the Quinte region and in Quinte West. So many businesses in the city have also come forward to lend products for the Good Deeds bags that reward local heroes like the ones at the Care and Share Food Bank, TMH, and our emergency services. And with my ministry at Community and Social Services, we've also been able to team up with Feed Ontario, which supplies the food banks right across the province. With a special deal, we've given them $8 million and worked out a deal with the Retail Council of Canada, which is donating all of the boxes and packaging material to Feed Ontario to get more money and more food out there, because we have seen an increase in the usage at our food banks, including Gleaners here in Belleville and Trenton Care and Share as well. You know, we also have been fortunate that beyond our own supply chains, people in our community are tapping into that community spirit and helping out with their local businesses. So, you know, we've seen local brewers, we've seen local distillers like Kinsip over in Prince Edward County that have moved from producing beer or spirits to producing hand sanitizers. Grant Cannon at Quinte Marine and Canvas was about to close his doors, and he sees the opportunity to go from making boat covers to the masks. And we've all seen that libraries and college professors get into the business of 3D printing, facial protection, and P&G in Belleville is now producing a line of the N95 masks as well, which are so important. And I can tell you that my living room and my kitchen at my house is piled up with homemade masks. My wife, Tanya, has been one of the, I guess, major players with the Quinte Sewing for COVID-19 project. She doesn't sew. I don't sew. We don't even have a sewing machine in our house. As Sean Kelly at Mix 97 would say, he comes from a musical family. Even his sewing machine was a singer. But I don't know how to sew. And neither does Tanya. But we have been running all across the Quinte region, into Frankfurt, to seniors' homes there where they need these face masks, and dropping them off and picking up the materials, the elastic, the buttons, the different materials, and making these masks. So we've really seen a great effort across the Quinte region. When it comes to businesses, and you know, I know that's why you're on the line here today. We've been working with the federal government and trying to make sure that we're getting the programs out the door that you need. We know that our businesses are nimble and they are able to adjust, and you've been doing a great job. And we know that you're going to drive Ontario's economy and Quinte's economy, you know, when we do emerge from this. And we have released our action plan at the provincial government, and give me the opportunity just to talk about some of the things that we've done so far for businesses at Queen's Park. We provided $6 billion in cash flow relief through a 5-month interest and penalty-free period on most provincially administered taxes. We increased the employer health tax exemption, providing $365 million in relief for about 57,000 employees. We've made electricity bills more affordable for small businesses and farms through a $1.5 billion increase in electricity costs and the freezing of the time of use rates at off-peak levels. And we just extended that through to the end of the month as well, after the initial 45-day period ran out. We've deferred the quarterly education property tax payment by 90 days. That gives municipalities like Quinte West the opportunity to provide some tax deferrals, which I know has been happening at the municipal level as well. We've provided $1.9 billion in new financial relief through WSIB, through deferring payments for 6 months there. We proposed a new corporate income tax credit as well. So when we emerge from COVID and businesses start looking at setting up in jurisdictions again, there's going to be a regional opportunities investment tax credit there. So those are just some of the steps that we've taken at the province. More recently, we've been working with the feds to introduce the commercial rent support program that will reduce rents for many businesses by 75% for April, May, and June. Renters would be responsible for 25% of the rent. Landlords would agree to forego 25%, and the governments would cover the balance. And it applies to businesses who pay less than $50,000 in gross monthly rent and who have either temporarily closed or seen a 70% drop in pre-COVID revenues. Now, I know there have been some issues, and we're continuing to get feedback from businesses. And as Suzanne alluded to off the top of the call, we're still encouraging and giving the feedback to our colleagues on Parliament Hill as we work together to create this program. In addition to that rental program, we've advocated for, with our federal partners and for them to offer additional support for businesses, and they're set to deliver that with wage subsidies and interest-free loan programs. And as a matter of fact, I know the Prime Minister has an announcement today that's going to impact small businesses. So to Suzanne's point, stay tuned, and there's going to be more good news from Parliament Hill there today for business owners as well. So while we've created action plans to keep vulnerable populations in long-term care and congregate care settings and provided them with a $4 an hour shift premium in frontline public sectors facing challenges to maintain staff. And I've had a few of those in my Ministry of Children, Community and Social Services as well, where staff have walked off the job because of dangerous situations in group homes. And certainly we've seen that happening in long-term care facilities where staff haven't been coming to work. We were able to work with the federal government to bring forward that pandemic pay that will impact workers at our hospitals, our frontline workers in congregate care settings like long-term care, retirement residence, group homes, child and youth mental health, shelters, those types of facilities across the province, just to make sure that we're supporting those people that live in that congregate type of living setting. We're working to maintain reasonable precautions to see the decrease in community spread necessary to continue to reopen the economy. And we're continuing to see positive news when it comes to the numbers. I'm sure you're watching for them every day. And although we did see a little bit of an increase yesterday in the number of new cases in Ontario, the stats have been, for the most part, going in the right direction, and that's in a downward trend. As we work diligently to continue the rollout, we're planning for the economic recovery, as I've already mentioned. And my colleagues, Vic Fideli and the Minister of Finance, Rod Phillips, are heading the Ontario Jobs and Recovery Committee. It's going to be instrumental in putting us back into work. And at the same time, we're supporting the Ontario Chamber of Commerce and a lot of their recommendations as well, and working with them to get you the tools and the support that you need. So working together with our federal counterparts, with our municipal counterparts, with our colleagues at the Chamber of Commerce, and there's Suzanne live in person. Thanks for the opportunity to be here today and update you a bit on what has happened at Queen's Park and how we've been working together with the federal government to make sure there's support out there for you at these very challenging times.
Very good. So I think now we're going to go into answering some questions that we have. Some of them have been pre-submitted, and I did send them to your office ahead of time, so hopefully you've had a chance to look at those. And we've also had a few last-minute ones from people that were hoping to be on the call today, but something's come up and they've asked me to ask on their behalf. And then we also are going to switch over to at the end to allow for live questions in case, like I said, things keep changing. So people may have new questions that they want answered. So I guess the first question to ask, because I know that governments are working really hard, and I know, you know, businesses are falling through the cracks still, and there's things being worked on to try and help. But do you feel that the provincial government's response to the COVID-19 crisis and the economic shutdown has been enough?
You know, we made significant investments. You know, we on I think March the 25th was when Minister Phillips stood up in the legislature and made the spring economic statement. Of course, it was supposed to be the budget and a multi-year budget at that time, but we had to delay the budget, and we brought in a spring economic statement and our COVID action plan, and it was a $17 billion package, which is pretty significant. 10 billion of that included those tax and fee deferrals that I was mentioning earlier, so that businesses could have some cash flow at this time, and it would also give municipalities an opportunity to provide businesses with some cash flow as well. The major response in that piece, although it was smaller at $3.3 billion, was aimed at making sure the healthcare response was there. So we were getting the funding to hospitals and long-term care facilities and retirement residences so that they could meet the needs on the healthcare side. But at the same time, there was $3.7 billion in that 17 billion that went directly to support for people and jobs. And the federal government has been in a better position. I think a lot of people out there in business know the situation that we inherited in the province a couple of years ago when we became the government. And, you know, we had debt to GDP was at almost 41% at that time, which doesn't give you a whole lot of room to maneuver. So we've been able to work very, very closely with the federal government on a lot of these programs to ensure that we're trying to get as much support as we can out the door to businesses. So I'd say and the Premier has said this many times, we're not going to leave a penny on the table. We're going to make sure that the support is there. But what we're trying to do is maximize that collaboration with the federal government to get as much as we can out the door to businesses. And we're continuing to do that.
Yeah, and I think that's been one of the surprising thing for many Canadians, and especially here in Ontario, is to see the levels of government working so well together. You know, Premier Ford and Prime Minister Trudeau have worked really well. The ministers in the various different departments seem to be collaborating a lot, and there's definitely been a lot of meetings and interaction between the various provinces, and, you know, looking at, you know, how Alberta helped out Ontario with PPE and things like that. So, you know, it has been surprising, I think, to many. And I think it is something that people really needed to see during this time. Do you feel that the federal government's response to the crisis has been enough for businesses? And what more would you like to see them do?
Yeah, so the federal government's response has been unprecedented. I mean, the numbers coming out of Ottawa are wild, to be honest, the amount of support that they've been offering. And we thank them very much for being a good partner in this. And, you know, we've been looking at support for people, and we've been looking at support for businesses. Yesterday, there was a big announcement for seniors, a $2.5 billion program. As I mentioned, there's going to be another announcement today from the Prime Minister aimed at small businesses. And I know there's a lot of small business people out there that are, you know, on the edge, and they want this support. And we've been trying as best we can to work collaboratively to get these programs out the door. And every time we announce something, you know, there's been a saying, I've never really heard it that much before, but I almost hear it every day now. It's perfection is the enemy of the good. I don't know how many times you've heard that over the last little while, but certainly in government, we've been saying it every day. You know, we can't get these programs out quick enough. And if we want them to be perfect, it's going to take way too long. So a lot of these programs that we've been rolling out over the last 2 months normally would take months and months and years of policy work developing these programs. And we've been doing them in a matter of weeks. So they're not perfect. And that's why we've seen, the federal government, and you've talked about the fact you've got to tune into the website, or Minister Ng federally has said, you got to check the website or make sure you're watching this news conference, because the programs haven't been perfect when they're first announced, and they have been changed. And I got to give the federal government credit. They've been listening when Premier Ford or Minister Phillips or myself or anyone from the provincial government contacts them to talk about how this program could work better if we did it a little bit differently. And so things are changing all the time. So the amount of money that they've been shoveling out the door to try and help individuals and businesses really is unprecedented.
Given the vast spending through all levels of government, and I know even municipally, the municipality has deferred payments and things like that, property taxes and other payments. So all levels of government are certainly doing what they can within their own budgetary restrictions. Are you worried about the financial deficit in Ottawa and at Queen's Park that we're going to all have to deal with? I know there's been some conversation. People are worrying if the government's going to increase the HST. Is there going to be new taxes put on the table? Because obviously at some point, at some time, we're going to have to start to pay some of this money back. Is that something that is a big concern for you at this time?
Yeah, the deficits are always a big concern, and they're a concern for us in Ontario at Queen's Park, certainly, and we were on a trajectory to get to a balanced budget in the next 3 or 4 years. Unfortunately, because of COVID-19, I'm sure that's all changed. We do understand that you have to be fiscally responsible, because that puts you in a position to be able to react to something like a pandemic that we're in right now, with programs to support businesses. And the province needs to have the flexibility to respond to situations like the one we find ourselves in today. And that's why, since the election, we've been working to ensure that Ontario's on a strong financial footing, that we were creating jobs in the private sector and making sure there was that kind of robust GDP growth, and the economy was ticking, and it really was ticking. As I mentioned earlier, 300,000 jobs had been created, and the difficulty we were having up until about 2 months ago was finding workers to fill those jobs. And talking with the chambers of commerce across the province about making sure that we could get people to fill those jobs that were being created by the job creators in Ontario. So we're in a situation in Ontario, and I mentioned it earlier, where we have the largest subnational debt in the entire world. It's a massive, massive debt. And the Financial Accountability Officer came out last week, or this week, I can't remember, the days are running together, but indicated that there's the potential that our deficit this year could be a record $40 billion, which I never, ever in my wildest dreams thought that I would be a member of a government and a cabinet that has a $40 billion deficit. But that's just how massive this pandemic, this COVID-19 pandemic has been. And a lot of that isn't necessarily spending at the provincial level. It's the lack of revenue that's coming in that's having an impact on that deficit as well. So I think municipalities are seeing that. The federal government has, because they have their own printing press and they're able to print money, has been able to react when it comes to financial incentives a little more quickly than the provinces have been able to do that. But certainly debt and deficit are huge, huge concerns. We're spending about $1 billion a month prior to COVID-19 on interest on our debt in Ontario. And you think about that $1 billion a month and what we could be doing with that billion to ensure that we're supporting businesses during a time like this if we weren't paying that $1 billion. So we were on a trajectory. Unfortunately, this has derailed that plan, and Minister Phillips will have a new blueprint for the next number of years, hopefully in November when things start to ease a bit.
Okay. And I know from watching the Premier, and I'm sure for all of the people in cabinet, I mean, it has to be a little bit exhausting, because they're holding press conferences every single day. I don't know if the Premier himself has missed too many days when he's not out in front of the cameras. and sharing his own heartache in many cases over the deaths and the closing of the economy and what's happening to businesses in our province. And you can tell, especially in the past week, he's anxious to get things reopening and get into that next phase of the economy, as I'm sure everybody on the call today wants to know, when is phase one coming? When can we start reopening businesses or relaxing the rules for businesses? Sectors well, the two sectors in particular, and I think they're going to be very hard hit here in the Quinte region, much like they are across the country, the hospitality and tourism sectors. Is there going to be any additional help from the province for these sectors? Because we're already seeing restaurants shut down in Belleville. I haven't heard of any yet in Quinte West, but it could happen very easily. The losses that these businesses are facing right now through the shutdown is massive. But on top of that, they were the first ones to get hit by this, and they're probably going to be the last ones to be allowed to go back up to full operation. So they're gonna be challenged in the recovery stage as well. So what is the province doing for those two sectors in particular?
So there is a plan being developed right now. We talk about it every day in our cabinet meetings, and they are actually going out to the public for input on what the new normal or temporary new normal will look like post COVID-19, or at least during the next phase of the pandemic, particularly for the tourism and hospitality sector. Lisa MacLeod, who's the minister responsible for heritage, tourism, and culture industries, and I think there's sport in there somewhere as well. But she's been having regular webinars on a weekly basis with businesses. I don't know, Suzanne, if you've been in on one of those or not, but certainly we can make sure that you are.
I was in on one of them.
Yeah, so
I was in on one of them. Yeah.
She's been having these with different sectors. Yesterday, I was on one with her specifically for the wine sector because of my interests and our interests in Prince Edward County with the wine growers down there, grape growers down there. So the plan is evolving, and we want your input too. So I know you have the website at the Chamber of Commerce where individuals can provide their feedback on this, but the various phases are going to be rolled out over the coming weeks, and that's part of the Premier's announcement tomorrow. And all of this is predicated on those health indicators, those public health indicators going in the right direction. So we can't move to stage one until the numbers show that we're safe to do so. And even when we do so, it's paramount. It's so important that our business owners, and I know they're going to act accordingly because they want their businesses to be open, but they're going to have to follow the guidelines that have been laid out by the Ministry of Labor. So if you haven't checked the Ministry of Labor website yet, all of the guidelines for your potential reopening are there. So, you're only going to be allowed to have so many people per square foot inside your facility. To start with, in the hospitality sector and in restaurants and things like that, you may only be able to have a certain percentage of your tables in the facility in the early stages of this until we start to get, rid of COVID-19 in our community, and COVID-19 is still out there. So we have to be very, very careful, making sure we're cleaning, making sure that you're wearing the PPE. So all of those guidelines are there. The last thing we want to do is open and then have to shut it down again. And we are starting to see the second phase of this, or the second wave of it, hitting in other parts of the world. I was watching the news last night, and you've probably seen this, but the numbers have started to come back in places like South Korea, which had done such an outstanding job in limiting, as we have here in Ontario, limiting the number of cases. It's starting to come back in China. It's starting to come back in Japan. So until we get that vaccine or COVID-19 does the SARS disappearance act, we're not out of this. And certainly we are still seeing new cases popping up here in Ontario and across the country and around the world.
Yeah, and I think, I did have a question actually that was submitted on that particular topic, and it was from Brandy Brown, who owns Off the Hook boutique here in Quinte West. And she had asked about, if when the second wave comes, is the government's plan to do a complete shutdown again? Is it going to be, a business is going to have to face of being open and shut on a pretty regular basis? Or, now that we've kind of gone through the first wave, does the government have a different plan for when that second wave can hit? Because I think we all are kind of expecting that to happen.
We've learned a lot through the first phase. I don't have an answer to Brandy's question. Will we have to shut down? I think it probably depends on the kind of numbers that we do see if there is, God forbid, a second wave of this. I think now we have a better idea of how we can control the community spread. When we were hit with this in mid-March, it was a bit unknown. I mean, we've been talking about this at the cabinet table for a few months, and the fact that this was happening on the other side of the world and could potentially be happening here, and doing the best we could to prepare for it. But I mean, it's the virus is different than anything we'd ever seen before, and I think we've learned so much over the last number of months, especially when it comes to the asymptomatic spread of this. I think we always thought that if you were sniffling or you had sneezes or a fever, you should stay at home, but we really didn't know that if you didn't have any symptoms, that you should stay home. So the important thing I believe going forward is, and we've been hearing a lot about this, is testing and making sure that we are testing as many people as we can, not just in long-term care facilities. And the Premier has made sure that directive has gone out to test every single resident in long-term care, and that should be done hopefully by the end of the week. And that's a major undertaking to have that done in a province the size of Ontario, which is the size of about half of Europe. So it's been quite an undertaking. But then starting to move into the general population, and we have been doing some in the general population, but we're going to be doing more of that. And then contact tracing is the other key piece of this, making sure that where possible, and there's a lot of civil liberties folks that aren't real happy about the idea of doing this, but making sure that we're tracking people who have tested positive so that we can limit the amount of spread in the community. I think it's so important to making sure that we don't have to do, in Brandy's case, what she had to do is shut down the business, and we can keep it open. The good part about it is as well, and a lot of businesses have done what they probably never ever saw themselves doing, and that is having internet-based business or online business. And so hopefully, God forbid, again, we get into a second phase, they'll be better prepared to deal with it from a business perspective as well, to continue to service their customers online or over the phone or at the curbside.
Okay. So another question I have is, the three programs in particular that I know the businesses here in Quinte West have been asking about, and I've certainly been helping them get all the information. Is either the loans program through the CEBA account, which is really for small businesses, the wage subsidy, the CEWS or the Qs or whatever you want to call that one, has certainly been well taken up here in the region, and businesses are finding that help has been really great. And then the third one is the rent subsidy program, which obviously is a joint program between the province and the federal government. There's been a lot of feedback on that particular program, especially because businesses are really relying on their landlord to A, agree with reducing their rent by 25%, and B, agreeing to administer and pay for this program. And then it would reduce the rent for the business, but up to just 25%. They would basically, the other 75% would be covered by the government and the landlord. Businesses are worried that landlords aren't going to do this. Is there more changes coming on this program? And I know the other concern, other than the landlords actually doing the program, is non-mortgage properties. I know it was done through the Canada Mortgage and Housing. It was directed at mortgage properties. Here in Quinte West, a lot of businesses, especially a lot of the property owners, have had those properties for many, many years. They don't have a mortgage on them. They own them. And so currently they don't fit the criteria, but I've heard changes are coming. What insight can you give us on that particular program?
So you've probably heard me say perfection is the enemy of the good. You know, I think that the program rolled out, and we've certainly heard a lot of feedback at the provincial level, and I know that my colleagues on Parliament Hill have heard the same kind of feedback. We had a caucus call the other day, and I can't tell you what goes on in caucus, but certainly almost every caucus member across the province was hearing of landlords who weren't going to participate in this program. The program isn't actually even up and running yet. So, you know, I think a lot of the details have come out, but as with a lot of the programs, they are subject to change. So I think what I would say to anyone out there who does have a landlord who's not participating in this, or if you are a landlord that doesn't feel like they want to participate in this for whatever reason, and you have feedback, make sure you're reaching out to your MP or your MPP to let them know what changes you would like to see to this program, because all of these programs are continuing to evolve, and then new programs are coming all the time too. So while this program may not address your specific need, maybe the one that the Prime Minister is going to announce today will impact you more effectively. So it really is important that that you are paying attention to what's happening out there, and not just sitting there and complaining on Facebook, but actually reaching out to your member of provincial parliament or your member of parliament, so that we can advocate, and your chamber of commerce too, so that we can advocate on your behalf to get the changes in place that you would like to see.
Yeah, and on that too, I'm going to be continuing. I've said in these emails that are going out pretty well every other day, and they're going to the owners and the managers, our main contacts for each business, giving any updates and details and direct links that are coming from Minister Ng's office, so they're up to date, they're current. Also, I've been sharing all of the criteria that the province has put out there, the safety guidelines for businesses by sector. I've been sharing all of those, and they are a great resource for businesses. And as we're going to be starting to get into that recovery stage, I'm not necessarily trying to explain the programs as much, but more on what businesses can do. It's going to be more important than ever that people stay up to date and have access to those resources. And also, like you said, give feedback on where there isn't anything that's being offered that is needed. One last question before we sort of open it up to some of the people that we have joining us today that have a few questions live, is given that 60% of the COVID-19 in the province are actually in the GTA, you know, would you support reopening areas outside of the GTA faster, similar to what is being done in Quebec?
No, we've actually discussed this, and I think the point was made very, very clearly that we don't want people moving from one region to another. And we think that if, for instance, Bay of Quinte was opened up before the Toronto region was opened up, that a lot of people from the GTA would be swarming Bay of Quinte or Prince Edward County and potentially bringing COVID-19 into the community. We've been really, really fortunate about limiting the number of cases. So there have been a few tragic cases, obviously, in Bay of Quinte, but nothing like what we've seen in some of the larger city centers. So we think that a uniform opening across the province is the best way to go, and that's the approach that we'll be taking in Ontario.
Okay, very good. And then a question for you too on insurance. This is from Ontario Coachway, who's a member of ours, and obviously they've had to ground most of their fleet of coaches and other transportation. They're getting hit with some pretty big insurance fees, even though the nature of their business has changed. They say because they kind of the way they do it, with it being a fleet, it's hard just to kind of cancel it. Their insurance is coming up for renewal, and I know that one of the you know, he's going to try and work with his insurance agent to make sure that, you know, seeing is obviously the risk on all those buses and stuff that are parked has changed, that their insurance should adjust the premium for them until they can get back to, transporting people to sporting events and other kinds of things. What is your government doing around insurance premiums if the companies aren't voluntarily making those adjustments?
So I would encourage Ontario Coachway to reach out to the office so that we can hear the specifics. I know you've given me some of them, but we have been encouraging our insurance companies across the province to voluntarily make some changes to their policyholders in this time, and many of them have done that. The Minister of Finance has been working with the insurance companies. I heard just sort of anecdotally last Monday, I think it was, Ross McDougall, who of course owns McDougall Insurance, was on with Lauren Brooker on his show in the morning on the Monday Morning Roundtable, and they were talking about this and what different insurance companies were doing out there. Many of them had been kind of shamed, I think, into starting to do the right thing, or chose to be good corporate citizens and do the right thing and give their policyholders a bit of a break. So I don't know how much there is that we can do to force companies to do something, but we can certainly encourage them. And I know that the Minister of Finance has been doing that and has been successful in doing that as well. We've been doing the same thing with banks. To be honest, I know a lot of people early on were complaining about their banks not doing anything or giving anybody a break, but we've seen a bit of a shift, although that they're probably never going to do enough, but they have changed their policies. Some of them have to give some of their business owners and clients a bit of a break during this challenging time. So if Ontario Coachway wants to reach out, we'd be happy to advocate on their behalf through the Ministry of Finance.
Okay, yeah, I'll get him to do that. Now, one of the questions I received, and I've actually allowed, we have Chuck O'Malley and Dave Fairfield on the call. I'm not sure if they're able to unmute them. I've unmuted them if they would like to ask this question live, but it's certainly around seasonal businesses that operate outside and have a limited number of months in which they need to make their revenue for the year. And it's around, golf courses, marinas, campgrounds, things like that. When will they be allowed to open? And Dave and Chuck, I don't know if you want to add to that question, if you're able to.
I had a couple other questions for the Mr. Bit. Okay. I'm sure Chuck is more interested in golf than anything else now that he's retired. Yeah. I would imagine we'll hear something tomorrow on that.
Okay, so maybe we'll talk about the seasonal businesses first, Dave, and then we can go certainly to another question that you might have.
Okay.
Yeah, so I mean, Dave is right. I think there's probably a good chance that you're going to hear something about golf courses tomorrow. The fact that the Premier indicated last week that those business owners at golf courses should get their greens looked after and be prepared for customers to come was probably rather insightful into the fact that there may be some movement on golfing. And I know Chuck well, and I've never really seen him golf, but it seems to probably be somewhat futile given his athletic prowess. So
one of the two is working hard, so that's probably why you didn't see him. The other questions I had, just quickly, and I don't know if there's been more details now, so it's the $4 an hour pandemic pay increase for frontline workers.
Yeah.
And as well, I haven't seen a lot of information as to how that's to be paid out and when those details might be forthcoming.
Yeah, they're not out yet, and there have been some changes with this program as well, and who actually is eligible for the pandemic pay. So what I would say is stay tuned for that as well. The way it happened was, we had gone to the federal government and said, we need to make sure that we have staff in these long-term care facilities in particular. I advocated to make sure that we had staff in the group home sector as well, because we did have an unfortunate incident in Markham back on the Easter weekend where all of the staff walked out. So this pandemic pay was meant to ensure that we have proper staffing in place. Unfortunately, those individuals that work as PSWs and DSWs aren't making a heck of a lot of money, and there was more incentive for them actually to go home and collect the CERB than there was to go into a dangerous situation, and potentially dangerous situation in long-term care. So we've been making changes. The federal government approved the first round of our pandemic pay, and then we've made some changes to that, and now they'll have to approve that as well. So as far as that goes, Dave, and your payroll work that you're doing, there'll be more details coming out very, very soon on that.
So there's certainly a lot of questions on that one. And
yeah.
We're not sure whether they would go directly to the government to apply or whether it would be done through the payroll and the company would then get reimbursed by the government.
No, it's actually going to be happening on the ground in each individual location. So it's going to be happening with Quinte Healthcare. It's going to be happening with the long-term care facility, and those details will be coming. So there's going to be some work for you to do.
Good. All right. Not that I'm busy enough. And the second question, there was changes for minimum wage workers and whatnot that are working in frontline grocery stores, that kind of thing, coming through. And I've heard something about that, but I'm not sure the details in that one either.
That was happening with each individual business. So in the case of Loblaws, for instance,
right?
Loblaws had increased the pandemic pay for the folks at Smiley's and anybody who works in the Loblaws chain. So we've seen a number of different businesses that have taken that initiative themselves, just to ensure that they're working.
I thought I heard the province was doing something as well.
Not specifically on retail. No. Ours is limited to healthcare, frontline healthcare workers in congregate care settings. So not for.
Perfect. That's all I had. Thank you.
Thanks,
okay,
Dave.
So next I have Ron Rydell from the YMCA. Ron, are you able to ask your question?
Yes. Can you hear me?
Hi, Ron.
Yeah,
hi, Ron.
You, Ron.
How you doing, Todd?
Very good. You?
Good. Actually, that's a difficult question to answer, but anyway.
Yeah, I know.
I'm healthy. My question is around. Recently, we've gotten some detailed guidelines from the U.S., from CDC, and some state governments. Wondering if you have any idea when the province will release anything, or local health units will release any detailed guidelines on how businesses can reopen.
Yeah, so those are out now, and they are at the Ministry of Labor. Monty McNaughton is our minister for the labor file. He announced those guidelines, I think, late last week, and there's about 80 guidelines out there for businesses that they'll be required to follow. Inspectors will be out there ensuring when the businesses reopen that they are following those guidelines. So I believe if you go to the Ministry of Labor website, those guidelines should be there on. And if they're not, make sure you give us a call and we'll hook you up with the link that you need to get those. But the guidelines are out, and I would recommend for all businesses, whether you're in the first stage or second stage or third stage, when those stages are released tomorrow, that you're looking at those and you're preparing for those, because you're going to be required to go out and get PPE, the protection equipment that you need for your business. So you're going to have a little bit of lead up time to make sure that you can access that PPE. And as you know, it's been a bit of a challenge for those even in frontline healthcare to get their hands on that equipment. So this is going to be one of the challenges to slowly reopening the economy as well, is the strain on that PPE is going to continue to become more intense. We're continuing to pump out a lot more domestically through the various companies that have signed up to join us in that effort. But the challenges are still there, and will grow with the number of businesses coming online that are going to be required to have that.
Excellent. We've on the topic of PPE, we have been sourcing that for some time now, and being careful not to interfere with the product lines that are going to healthcare workers. But yeah, we've been trying to stay ahead of that. But so it's through the Ministry of Labor, not through the health unit, that we get this information.
So Ministry of Labor should have those up. And Adam is checking right now here in my office just to make sure I'm right on that. But I know that Monty announced those guidelines last week. And then when it comes to PPE as well, one of the things that we're working at, and I'm not sure if it's up and running yet, but they were looking at a business-to-business website where businesses can go and look and see what companies in Ontario are producing PPE to potentially acquire the PPE that they need from those Ontario-based companies, so that you're not, sourcing all over the world. One of the crazy things that has been happening over the last couple of months, and I appreciate all of the phone calls and all of the emails and texts, but there are so many people in our region that have contacts on the other side of the world and were able to access PPE. And they were saying, I've got a friend who is a reliable source and they can get you 5 million masks or 50 million masks or hand sanitizer or whatever it is. So all of those different leads, I was forwarding to Vic Fidelli and his team at the Ministry of Economic Development, Job Creation and Trade. They had formed a group called the Ontario Together site, where they were looking at all of these leads, finding out which ones were legit, and then making acquisitions or trying to buy whatever they needed from these leads. So some of them have materialized. Some of them were a cousin of a cousin of a cousin, and they might not have materialized. But certainly it's been a big effort to make sure we're getting our hands on as much of that equipment as we could.
Excellent. Thanks.
Perfect. Okay, next up, I have Lori Dennis. A question from Lori Dennis from Trenton Cold Storage. Lori, are you able to ask your question live?
I am. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yeah, hi, Lori.
Hi, Todd. Thanks for your time today. I actually have two quick questions. The first is around the contact tracing that you talked about. We know from our colleagues in Alberta that Alberta has rolled out an app for that. Is there plans to do that in Ontario? And if there is, what's the timing on that?
Yeah, so I know that the Premier has been talking to Jason Kenney about what they're doing in Alberta. Can't give you a timeline, but I know they have looked very, very closely at using the same type of technology and contact tracing that they're using in Alberta. It's so key to limiting the second wave of this and dealing actually with the first wave. So I can't give you a timeline, but I know that the premiers have talked about that, and there's been discussion not just with the folks that Alberta is using, but there are other companies here in Ontario that have expressed an interest to me and other cabinet ministers in being a part of that contact tracing effort here locally as well.
Okay, perfect. Look forward to hearing some more about that. My second question, we're an essential service and we still have about 200 people working at our various sites. We have had our head office staff, finance, customer service, sales, IT, all home since mid-March. And, as we're thinking about going back to work and putting people back in the office, what's your advice on that? From a social distancing standpoint, what's the risk reward to having people back in the office? We've done well, but we're still, I feel like we may still have gaps that we need to fill in by being in the same location.
Yeah, listen, I like being able to look somebody straight in the eye and ask them a question, and being able to just run around the corner to ask a question instead of, the Zoom is fine. It works okay, but there's nothing like real person-to-person interaction. The guidelines are there at the Ministry of Labor as far as what they're recommending. But I think we're going to see a lot of businesses, and I've talked to a lot of business owners. One Fortune 500 company that I was talking to just last week that says, man, our business model is going to change so much as a result of this. No longer are we going to be sending people across the country for in-person meetings. We're just going to do it over Zoom now. And I think we're going to see a lot of that changing as a result of what we've just experienced, or we are experiencing now. So I think a lot of it is going to be a personal decision based on what the company feels is most important. But certainly as far as the social distancing guidelines go and the regulations that will be in place, they're on the website, and those you will have to follow should you decide to bring people back into your office space or your warehouse space in your case, so that they are recognizing the physical distancing regs that are in place, and the hand washing and all that type of stuff that's going to be required.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so we have one last question live. I have Matt. Matt, are you able to ask your question live?
Oh, yep. Yeah, I'm here. Mine was just about the service clubs and wondering if there was any subsidies planned for them. I know with us, with the Kiwanis Club, basically all of our events this year have been shut down. We've incurred fairly significant costs for the club, especially with the surrounding the fishing derby, which things that we had to, purchase ahead of time. I'm just wondering if that's something that's been looked at yet.
Yeah, it's something that we have talked about. We very, very early on, not necessarily for service clubs, but for charitable and nonprofit organizations, put out a $200 million program. The federal government just last week, I think, put out a $350 million program to impact, charitable and nonprofit organizations as well. As far as service clubs are concerned, I can tell you that in my ministry, and I'm responsible for a lot of the community-oriented organizations like Kiwanis. There was just recently an ask for $650 million to help meet some of the shortfalls that you're talking about at Kiwanis. So I don't know if you guys were part of that ask or not, but there's a lot of charitable organizations out there and service clubs that are feeling the pinch of this because all of their events have had to be canceled. It's something that we're looking at, and of course, we don't know how long this is going to last either. So, we're trying to find the right balance between ensuring that we have the funding there to meet our health requirements. And Ontario is somewhat limited, as I mentioned, because we don't have a whole lot of room there, given the financial situation in the province, to make sure that we're meeting the healthcare requirements first, and then looking to the business community, and then looking to charitable and non-for-profit organizations and shelters and food banks and those types of things as well. So you're on the radar. We've been talking about you, that's for sure. And hopefully you'll be able to get up and running soon, Matt, but you're definitely on the radar, and I can't give you a definitive answer as to when any help might be flowing, but we've been talking to our federal counterparts about that as well.
Perfect, thanks.
So just one, we have actually ran out of time. So thank you for being so generous. If you might just indulge me for one last question that I had sent in. It was around cottages. Obviously, here in the Quinte region, a lot of people do have rental cottages. Do you have any idea of when they may be allowed to be rented out for the summer?
To rent out like a short-term accommodation type of a situation. It's going to be a while yet. It's not going to be in the first phase, I can tell you that. As far as cottages go, if you want to go to your cottages, the advice has been go to your cottage, don't leave the property, bring your groceries, bring your provisions. In Chuck O'Malley's case, bring your OV to the cottage with you. Don't be running to the local beer store in cottage country. Make sure that you've got all your equipment that you're going to need with you. And I think we're going to probably start to see some news on campgrounds where permanent seasonal homes are located in the very near future. But as far as like an Airbnb rental type of a situation, I think it'll be a little while before we start to see that business picking up again.
Okay. All right. Well, that was the last question that I have. Thank you very much for joining us today and for being part of our webinar. It's certainly been very informative, and we may have to get you back again in a couple weeks' time because, like we said, these things keep changing. So we may have to call you back, especially as we get maybe a little further into that recovery stage and what we can do there.
No problem. Anytime. Thanks, Suzanne. Keep up the great work at the Chamber.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you, everybody, for joining us.